Norwich Confidential with your hosts, Dr. Ben Hong, Bonnie Hong, and Mr. Bob Farwell.
Good evening. I'm Ben Hong.
And I'm Bonnie Hong. We have two guests. One is live in the studio, and you're going to love listening to him. And the other we did a taping with yesterday. So I think we're going to start the show off.
Well, our topic for tonight will be about organic gardening and GMO seeds, GMO products, the DARK Act. There's an actual legal name for the DARK Act, which we will talk about a little bit later. This show tonight is a carryover from last week's movie. Last week we showed the Seeds of Death with Jeffrey Smith that really showed a lot of the facts concerning GMO seed. Tonight our first guest, we'll do the tape, and then that's a good lead-in, I think, for the rest of the show. We wrote two books.
Well, our guest here wrote that book.
Exactly.
So we'll talk about his book
and
shortly.
The other book that you brought in is The Seeds of Deception.
That Jeffrey Smith wrote.
Right.
That was, this one is what Seeds of Death was based on, the documentary on GMO testing, the tests that have been done, the scientific tests that have been done, and we'll talk about that just a little bit later. But let's go to the interview that we did yesterday with Tara Cook-Littman. Tara is actually a prosecutor from New York. She's a holistic health counselor. She's the mother of three. Tara is also the co-founder of GMO Free and led the movement for GMO labeling in Connecticut. So let's first go to the tape we did with Tara yesterday and then come back live into the studio. As a prosecutor, you're an attorney and a prosecutor, you really got very involved with the GMO movement. You were particularly involved with getting the first national legislation in any state here in Connecticut passed for GMO labeling. Do you want to tell us a little about that?
Sure. Well, I wanted to combine my passion for health and wellness with my advocacy skills as an attorney, so it worked really well. 2 years ago, Connecticut was the first state in the nation to pass a GMO labeling law, and it happened for one reason and one reason only. The people of Connecticut used their voices and fought back and were able to push back against these incredibly powerful corporate interests that are trying to keep us in the dark about what we're eating. It was an effort that took place across the state, an educational campaign, as well as a campaign focused on our state legislature, getting them to understand why we have a right to know what we're eating.
You said keep us in the dark. The DARK Act, or the Safety and Accuracy.
The Food Safety Accuracy, it's a ridiculous title.
It is exactly the opposite of what it is.
Correct.
So we refer to it as the DARK Act. It has passed the House. It's now slated, it's in one of the committees in the Senate. What are your feelings about the DARK Act and what that could do if it does pass the Senate?
Sure. The DARK Act could have very serious consequences, in particular with GMO labeling. It would literally wipe out the laws in Connecticut, Vermont, and Maine that have already passed. It would preempt states from continuing on with these laws, and worse than that, it would prevent the federal government from ever passing a strong mandatory GMO labeling law. It would codify voluntary labeling that's already been in place, that nobody's ever taken advantage of.
What amazes me is within that act, it also allows GMO products to be labeled as natural.
Correct, which we think is also ridiculous because they're anything but natural. GMOs cannot happen naturally. By definition, they need to happen in a science lab, which is not natural. So that would also be terrible. And the other thing that they're looking to do with the DARK Act is put an additional pressure on non-GMO farmers. Just like you have to pay a fee to be certified organic, the DARK Act would now require non-GMO farmers to be certified non-GMO. Why are we putting the pressure on the folks who are doing the right thing? Instead, it should be if you want to grow GMO or you want to grow crops with pesticides, label those. The rest is just food.
Would you like to explain exactly what a GMO plant is?
Sure. GMOs are genetically modified organisms, and they've been created basically to be two types of seeds. One that can withstand the application of toxic herbicides like Roundup, and the other is pesticide producing. It produces its own pesticide so that every cell of that plant is producing a pesticide, and in fact is registered with the EPA as its own pesticide. Those seeds are. And those seeds are also usually herbicide tolerant as well.
One of the things that I understood, and I may be incorrect, but that they are non-species. They are not of the same species.
Correct. Well, when they make genetically engineered crops, they're taking DNA from bacteria and viruses and inserting it into the DNA of a crop such as corn, soy, canola, sugar beets. And so this is transgenic. They're taking genes from different species that could never, ever happen in nature. And then they're taking it and they're getting, the word is escaping me and I'm an attorney. Patents, thank you. They're getting patents on these crops so that nobody else can replicate it. All the money goes to them, and they're basically owning our food supply.
That really should be a warning to everyone when our food supply is basically being managed and controlled by one or two companies.
Correct. And that to me is in some ways even scarier than the GMOs themselves. That this is more about, not just about GMO labeling, it's about more. It's about our food supply being controlled by a couple of companies. It's about taking back our government from these strong industries that are dictating exactly what laws they want passed. We like to say that GMO labeling is about taking back our food, our government, and our children's future.
The health risks, I know that you're an attorney and not a physician, but the health risks are starting to come out by a number of physicians and researchers, not many of whom are in the United States.
Correct.
Those that have tried to say something, like there was a gentleman that worked for the FDA that was quickly fired when he started talking about some of the research that he was discovering at the FDA.
Yes.
Would you like to?
Sure. So here's the thing, right? The opposition to GMO labeling, the industry that's benefiting from the sale of GMOs, is the same industry that's doing most of the science. We like to call this tobacco science. So they come back and they tell the FDA it's perfectly safe. But we can't trust that science. Whether GMOs themselves are dangerous or not, I would say we still need to get more information, but there are certainly enough studies that have come out, as you stated, mostly from European scientists, that should cause us concern. The opposition likes to call us anti-science. We are not anti-science. We want more science. We want more information. We want the testing to be done. Americans have been eating this for 15 years. 15 years is not long enough to know what the long-term effects can be. We simply want the opportunity to opt out from this experiment before there's definitive science. We can't prove they're definitively dangerous, but they can't prove they're definitively safe either. And the chemicals that are being used with GMOs are proven to be toxic to humans and dangerous to our environment. I'm not sure if you know that glyphosate, which is the main ingredient in Roundup, has actually been classified by the World Health Organization in the last couple months as a probable carcinogen. If you're eating GMOs, you're eating glyphosate, a known probable human carcinogen.
The number of increases in, for example, celiac disease has increased by 400%, which is an astounding figure. And those that are pro-GMO have said, well, it's just better diagnostics by physicians. I doubt that. However, there have been other increases in many other diseases over the last 10, 15 years at astounding rates. And yet we still aren't looking at what the root causes are here in the United States. Some people have said that the FDA and the EPA and the agricultural organizations that the federal government oversees here are really working for the benefit of industry they're the industry's marketing arm. And in some ways I can understand that. But so how do you see the definition between marketing for our industry in the United States and protecting the consumer, protecting American citizens?
Well, I think there's no doubt that our government is working for the industry. They've completely been bought out, and that actually goes to a deeper problem of campaign finance reform, right? When you have these $1 million campaigns that our elected officials have to run, and they're getting funding from these big industries, then of course they're going to do what the industries want. So we need to do something about that. But absolutely, the government is not looking out for our safety. They're looking out for the industry interests, and that is the bottom line.
You've done more work than just in Connecticut in GMO labeling and this type of teaching. Can you
Yes.
talk a little bit about the research and some of the projects that...
Sure. So after our Connecticut law passed, it passed with a trigger clause, which meant that it would not implement until other states in our area also passed laws. So once our law was passed, we felt like our job wasn't done. So I joined forces with activists in other Northeast states, and we formed Citizens for GMO Labeling. And our sole purpose is to support activists in other states to pass GMO labeling laws and to build our movement so that ultimately we all want a strong federal solution, not the Dark Act, a strong federal solution. So Massachusetts is doing a great job. They're probably the next state to pass a law. Rhode Island is not far behind. As you know, Vermont and Maine also passed laws. Vermont's law is set to enact in July 2016. So in Connecticut, we are going to go back to our legislators and ask that they not leave Connecticut residents in the dark. If a small state like Vermont can enact their law, there is no reason that Connecticut can't join them.
That's really kind of exciting. What about research?
Scientific research?
Or, yeah, and any research that you've looked at?
Sure. Well, I've looked at a ton of research. And again, you know, the scientists that are in opposition of GMO labeling all work for the federal government. So not for the federal government, for the industry. And the federal government is accepting that as fact. But the research that I've read that really causes me concern came from Dr. Seralini in France. He did the longest feeding study on GMOs. He fed rats GMOs for 2 years, and also did some on the side that were only given Roundup. That study showed that these rats developed massive tumors in 2 years. So the problem without labeling, right, is that we don't have accountability or traceability. We can't trace back to know what folks are eating without labeling. So once there's more labeling, we'll have a better idea of, is there causation? Because right now we can't prove causation. You mentioned that many diseases have skyrocketed since GMOs have been introduced into our food supply. Since 1996, if you look at many diseases like celiac, like diabetes, many diseases, they're continuing to go up as the introduction of GMOs has gone up. But again, it looks like there's a correlation, but we can't prove causation because we don't have enough studies and we don't have the traceability back because of the lack of labeling.
Tara, we talked a little bit about the Dark Act and what you've done. What can the average citizen do now to stop the Dark Act?
Sure. Well, let your voice be heard.
Well, in Connecticut, our voices
Yes.
aren't really heard.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Fortunately, in Connecticut, all of our congressmen voted no on the Dark Act. Both our senators, Blumenthal and Murphy, are on our side. So what you need to do in Connecticut specifically is thank them for voting the right way. They need to hear you, and they need to know that you appreciate their vote. For the senators, we need to encourage Blumenthal and Murphy to not just be on our side and vote no, but we need to encourage them to be champions for us, to encourage the other senators to vote no. And then if you live outside Connecticut, you have some more work to do because there are a lot of states where the congressman, obviously we lost, the congressman voted yes, and the senators are slated to vote yes. So at that point, you really need to be contacting your congressman that voted yes and let them know how unhappy you are. Again, if they voted no, thank them, and focus all your attention on getting to your senators. This is a great time of year because right now they're all home for summer recess. Many of them are holding town hall meetings. Show up. Let your voice be heard and speak. And also, don't be afraid to set up meetings with them. Before I got involved in this work, our congressmen and our senators had no idea who I was. But I reached out and got meetings and sat down with them personally, and there's no reason that everybody out there can't do the same thing. They work for you, not the corporations. We just need to remind them.
Your congressman in this district is Congressman
Hines, yes.
and he's not been known to vote against any business. So I was very surprised and pleased that he did vote no on this bill.
Yes, well, I actually met with Congressman Himes last week in person, and he knows I'm unhappy with his vote on the TPP, and he knows that that was not a great vote in terms of supporting the people. And he said he had no intention of ever supporting the DARK Act, that he's on our side. He's completely for GMO labeling. So he's great on this issue.
Yeah, except that if it does, even if the DARK Act doesn't pass and the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement does, we still won't be able to have labeling because we will be sued.
It can completely cut us off at the knees. It's really interesting to watch this hierarchy of laws, right? State governments try to preempt local municipalities. The federal government tries to preempt the states. And now we have concerns with trade agreements that would completely preempt our own federal laws here in the United States. It's a frightening situation.
Well, the trade agreements aren't just for trade. They're actually protections for corporations. And again, when the governments are promoting the products made and produced in their countries, which would be great if we had more products and that are being produced in the United States, but we've let them go because of previous trade agreements. I think that there's a whole other issue.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a huge issue, but yet they're all connected. And that's why I always like to show people that GMO labeling is not just about GMO labeling. It's a symptom of the bigger problems that we have in this country right now. And I'm so grateful that there are people like you that are working on the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and there are other people working on GMO labeling, and there's a million different issues, like, again, Fighting Citizens United. We have to just start to come at this from every angle because industries have taken over our country. It's not for the people anymore, and that's not the America that I want my kids growing up in.
Tara, thank you very much for being with us this evening.
Thank you so much.
Maybe we can have you down live in person.
I'd love
another
to.
day. Thank
I'd love
you.
to.
Well, Bunny, that was very interesting, but let me ask you this question. If food had been manipulated in a way that you put in a different gene into it, and it becomes a chimera, or like you said, a transgenic
yeah.
type of organism, and then it is given to the people to be brought and eaten. Now, there is a government agency that is supposed to oversee all of this. Remember the FDA? Do you know what F means?
Food.
It should be food.
Food.
So if they are going to do this and do it and get it through the government, why doesn't the FDA say, hey, listen, just like any other drug that you want to market in America, you have to get this product passed through the FDA. So why isn't the FDA going through?
It has been passed through the FDA. The part of the problem is exactly as Tara explained, is the money in politics. Our current food czar, head of the FDA, was the CEO of Monsanto. Prior to that, he worked at the FDA, and prior to that, he was a lawyer or had another position over at Monsanto. So we've talked about this revolving door before on the show, and so when you have someone that advocates for Monsanto that's heading up the FDA, approval becomes pretty easy.
Well,
let me ask you something, Doctor. And then I'd like to go over to Bill, but let me just ask you one question. The study that she talked about, that Dr. Seralini did, was a controlled study. And I'd like you, after I explain the 3 sets of controls, I'd like you to explain what a control is. But he had 3 sets. One was fed regular feed. One was fed regular feed with actual Roundup thrown in the mix. The third set were fed GMO feed. The set that was fed the GMO feed was the one that showed the highest percentage of tumors, carcinogenic tumors.
Well-
What is a controlled set?
Well, let me explain to you what that thing is about and whether this will be acceptable in peer review. A controlled group is the group of similar study group animals that are fed the natural food that we normally would give to natural animal.
Right, which was the
And
first set.
then if you have the type 1 group that you now manipulate a little bit, a factor, into their food supply by adding the Roundup,
Right.
then that becomes study group 1. And then if you have another another group, then that becomes the study group 2. Now, in research, number 1, you have to have enough study group. In other words, there is a certain number that if any number comes up, becomes statistically significant, then you put a certain reliability into it because you have enough study group. You cannot just put 1 or 2 rats
Right,
in one control group and 1 or 2 rats.
Right.
And that is one of the things that you can produce in that research. Now, number 2, one research alone cannot make that conclusion for the simple reason peer review is not going to take that as fact. And that is the reason why I ask you about the FDA, because the FDA will not accept one study.
Okay, but just so I'm clear, that there have been a number of studies.
Well,
This one just happened to be the longest that she mentioned. But let's talk about the book that
well,
you...
let me
we
move
want to
forward.
get to our guests.
We
don't have...
will. First of all, let me ask you this. We're talking about GMO, and we all think of GMO as bad. Well, listen, not all GMO is bad for the simple reason it depends on what your intention is. If your intention is to just get this passed through without looking at the bad effects, then that is bad. Let's do it like what we always have done, and that is through the FDA process of new drugs. Find out what this new drug can do, but at the same time, find out the side effects and the harm it will do, because if indeed it does some harm, that should not go through. And
I
it's the
can't
same
even
thing.
listen to this anymore. You've pushed every button on me.
And I
Because,
will.
no,
because
Ben,
no,
that's
let-
exactly,
let
no,
me
I
put it
can't.
this way.
Because what you're
Because
talking
what
about
we
has
have-
already been done.
We
I
have-
wanted to, we have to
We
talk to...
will. Now, let me ask you this. In the natural type of so-called selection group, let's look at the tobacco industry. So they get the seed that has the highest nicotine and the highest tar because it tastes great. So now you have a tobacco, but they didn't realize that at the same time, they also included the gene that can cause cancer. So now that product is 50 years later is here. Now, let's put it this way. If somebody 50 years ago, or maybe 100 years ago, had taken the gene of the tobacco seed and put in an anti-cancer gene into it, today, nobody would have gotten cancer. Why are we having a lot of cancer? Because somewhere along the line, our food supply had been tainted, and we
Okay,
have been
and
propagating that.
Just to quickly answer the issue about the FDA, they have accepted, Monsanto has done all kinds of tests. They've presented their tests to the FDA. That's how they got approved. Their tests are absolutely biased tests. They have never done a third-party test in the United States ever. Going to our live guest,
Hello.
Bill Duesing. Bill is a 40-year organic farmer. He is an author. He's an environmental activist. He has been working to promote organic agriculture and greater local food sufficiency in Connecticut and throughout the Northeast. He is actually the founder and first president of the Connecticut NOFA, which is the New England
Northeast Organic Farming Association.
Northeast Organic
Farming Association.
Farming Association, and which is a fairly large organization for organic farmers, some
Yeah.
of whom are certified organic.
Definitely, yes.
The others are organic, which means that they are not growing GMO crops.
Yes, and a lot of our members are gardeners or landscapers who use organic methods, or just consumers who want to see more organic farms and support the work for helping beginning farmers and helping connect consumers and farmers in Connecticut, so we have a better, stronger food system.
Do you have concerns about the DARK Act?
Oh, I have great concerns about the DARK Act, and I don't think we need to get in the weeds or understand the kind of studies that have been done or even care whether or not GMOs are dangerous to us. It really is, the real danger is for our democracy. Poll after poll since somewhere in the late 90s has shown that 80 to 90 or maybe even 92% of Americans think their food GMOs should be labeled when they're in their food. If we had a democracy, it would have been labeled 10, 15 years ago. But our government, as Tara said, is controlled by the corporations, the lobbyists, and the insiders in Washington. So that we have really the DARK Act is a fight for control of our country and our government, as was indicated.
But in every industry, they do exert that control. It's not just the food supply, pharmaceutical supply.
It's the
oil
same in all
industry.
of it. The military
exactly,
supply.
military-industrial complex, and it's always been like
Pharmaceutical.
that.
and
So
and
if we're
fossil
talking,
fuel, yeah.
exactly,
Fossil fuel.
and if you're talking about the food supply, you cannot just say and focus it on the food supply, because the whole darn thing will just never go away. We have to change the entire culture of our government and saying, hey, listen, we just cannot go on like this, because this has become to be a big problem for us.
And
an
this is
oligarchy.
one
Yeah.
lever we have at the food system. I mean, we have a widespread public concern about GMOs.
This became the focus because we're putting something into our food system.
Yes.
Otherwise, nobody would probably say, hey, that's the way it's always had been.
But it
So-
also, I mean, the damage to the environment is incredible. These broad-spread herbicides, which are destroying the biodiversity, which is critical to our continued survival on this planet.
Like what, expand on that a little bit.
Okay, as was mentioned, most of the crops that have been genetically engineered have been genetically engineered to resist Roundup or glyphosate, an herbicide which kills all green plants except these things which are engineered to resist it. And there are a couple of other herbicides which different countries have, but the same thing. The glyphosate system has failed after 15, 20 years because now there are all these resistant weeds. So the next step is they're going to spray with glyphosate and 2,4-D, which we used in Vietnam War as a chemical warfare item. So now our food is going to be sprayed with both of those. And that's our corn, our soybeans, the sugar beets, which go for sugar, canola oil, cotton, which gets into the cottonseed oil in some of our food. So all of that will get into our bodies through the food and also get into the environment and destroy the biodiversity and also damage, the biodiversity of plants, but also likely the biodiversity of insect life and bacteria and fungi, which are critical to a healthy ecosystem.
Like bees?
Yes. Well, let me ask you a question, because in medicine, we do the same thing, all right? We create antibiotics against a bacteria,
Yes,
and the antibiotics will kill that bacteria initially,
Yes.
until this bacteria becomes resistant
yes,
to these antibiotics. So as a consequence, we make more stronger antibiotics
yeah.
that will not just kill the bacteria, but sometimes will also kill some of the organs of the human body.
yes,
And then you get another bacteria that comes out of this resistant, so much so that we now have a super bacteria in the hospital that will resist to any antibiotics known. And not only that, but the hospitals are now becoming to be a dangerous place to live.
I understand that.
But we never stop using the antibiotics. So what makes this different in the food product that you are talking about.
Well, antibiotics are much more limited in their use. I mean, except in agriculture. And that's one of the big problems, is that we use bacteria. I mean, antibiotics are fed to most of our cows and pigs in this country. And in those environments, they can mutate and mix with the people who are feeding the pigs. And I believe and bacteria sort of exchange genetic information very quickly
Right.
and can spread that. So
And
that's,
it has been known so many times that the poultry company was shed that goes down, and they have this contaminated lettuces or greens and so on, and before you know it, they have a big, massive recalls. So what I'm trying to say is this, that yes, we probably should be careful of what we are putting into our cornfields and so on, but at the same time, I think science really needs to really do better in not just watching themselves, but there should be the FDA. The FDA stands for the food, with more and better, regulations.
yeah, I think that there's a very strong role for the government in doing this kind of thing, but they haven't been doing it. There's a man named Stephen Drucker who's wrote a book, and I Altered Genes, and there's another part of the title,
Yes.
which he had got access to many documents from the FDA, which I haven't read it yet, but those who have tell me it's really damning for that FDA approval process going for these GMOs.
One of the reports that I read was specific when I asked Tara about the gentleman that worked at the FDA who was doing those studies.
Yes.
And found how what a health risk this really was, not just because of studies like that were done in Europe, where it was already shown that it was the genetic makeup that was causing the cancer, not specifically the Roundup,
Yes.
that caused other problems. The Roundup will cause other problems. And one of the things that many people don't understand is that that pesticide in that corn, as she said, is in every cell.
Yes.
It's the way it works is the bug bites it, and then that bug's stomach explodes. One of the bovine hormone that
Yes.
was given to cows,
And is still given to cows.
it's supposed to, I mean, that you have a lot of places now that have said they will not use that milk.
Yes.
Similac for babies
Yeah.
has come out and said we will not use that. I think that there are a couple grocery stores that have also said they will not use
Yeah,
that.
and there are a number of local, of smaller brands of milk which will say our farmers don't use RBST or bovine growth hormone.
But say that again so that our viewers understand what to look for when they go for milk.
RBST is the genetically engineered growth hormone which they feed to cows to give them a little more milk, which is less relevant in the smaller dairies, but some of these 1,000 and 10,000 cow dairies, I suspect that many of them are using that to get a little extra edge, to make a little more money on their milk. And so it then appears that it's milk mixed in with all the other dairies, so most cheeses, most large-scale products have some of that in its milk.
But it's very important, I think, and it's time-consuming, which is one reason why it's so difficult without the labeling
Yes.
for us to know what we're eating.
Yeah.
I've even gone to some farmers markets and asked the people that were there, is this a GMO crop? And because it wasn't the farmer that was there,
They didn't
said,
know.
I really don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know where this came from.
Well,
So-
there are very few GMO crops grown in Connecticut aside from the corn that's grown to feed the cows in Connecticut. There is some sweet corn that has both the Roundup Ready trait and the BT, the bacterial insecticide in it, that is grown, but it's, so you should ask about sweet corn. There may be some squash, but I don't think it's some zucchini kind of things that may be not very much grown in Connecticut. But if you go to the smaller farmers, especially if you go with organic farmers who can't use GMOs, or people who've signed the Connecticut NOFA Farmers Pledge, which says they won't use GMOs, look for those in the market. And
Say that again. So if they are a member of NOFA?
Not necessarily a member NOFA, but if they've been certified organic by the organic certifier, most of the ones in Connecticut are certified by a group called Bay State Organic, which is in Massachusetts, and they have to follow all the federal regulations, but they vouch for these farmers via paperwork and an inspection. Or Connecticut NOFA has a program called the Farmer's Pledge, which is for farmers who aren't certified, may not be big enough, or may not have markets that demand that certification, but they want to have something to present at their farmer's market or at their farm stand, which says we abide by basically organic techniques, but you can't use organic unless you're certified or a very small grower.
Right.
But you can't put up as Farmer's Pledge, say we don't use pesticides, we don't use chemical fertilizers, we don't use GMOs, and it also includes some things about energy use and fair labor practices, which aren't either involved in the organic certification.
On
Well,
your
I-
website, can I just ask him one more question
Yeah.
just about that? On your website, the organic farmers are obviously identified with the organic sign.
Yes.
Are the ones that have signed that pledge, are those the ones that are identified with the little leaf?
They are, yes,
Okay.
and they're probably a key to that. And some of the organic farmers have also signed that little leaf because they want to highlight their fair labor practices or their use of energy.
Well, we can hardly wait and talk to you about your book, Bill.
Okay.
But my last comment about GMO is this.
All right.
The biggest research and medical breakthrough nowadays is the use of what we call as monoclonal antibodies to treat diseases, and that is what you will hear and see on television, to use Remicade for rheumatoid arthritis or this medication for this disease. And you must have heard of that $1,000 a pill Harvoni for the treatment of hepatitis C. Well, the biggest breakthrough in research in this disease management is their ability to use gene
Therapy.
technique and insert it into a bacteria gene, and it will produce, again, the chimera, that will produce a species that will make an antibodies against this certain disease.
Yep.
Sometimes even making antibiotics obsolete. So now you have a bacteria that is man-made that is making good things for humanity.
I'm not saying we can never use GMOs,
And-
or that the science isn't good. I'm saying that if 90% of the people in this country think that GMOs should be labeled, and we are a democracy,
Yeah.
they should be labeled right now.
And they should be.
And if people are making them, they should be proud of them. I'm proudly made with GMOs.
Right.
But
Because
they're not
what
that.
I am saying is this, that almost every food product that we have, it is just recently that we are making the detailed analysis of the gene. And, we don't know that 100 years ago we found this particular bean that is growing just abundantly, and the farmers will say, hey, listen, let's propagate this bean, and by 2015, this is the most common bean that we are now in the market, whether you produce it organically or with fertilizer or whatever it is. Unknowingly, that bean carries a cancer gene, right? So now, we are seeing a lot of rise of cancers. And we didn't realize that this was brought onto us by that selection that was made 100 years ago from selecting that gene.
Do we know that that's the case?
Well,
No,
we don't know yet.
no.
However,
And I think that-
my analogy is, hey, from now
Bad
on,
analogy.
let us find something that will be anti-cancer, and let us insert it into these natural products that we have, like corns or beans and everything, or even tobacco,
Let
so
me
that
give you an
50 years
example,
from
just-
now,
No, let me give you
we
an
will
example.
all
and
be
then-
protected from
Yes,
having
an analogy
developed,
to what you're saying.
cancer.
You're talking about taking a human gene, and it's a human gene that is going to target that cancer or arthritis or whatever that disease is. It's still a human gene, Ben. If you, let's say you take what is the big tree in California that lives for
Eucalyptus?
the
No,
1,000
the
years?
redwood.
The redwood. Okay. If they start taking the gene from the redwood tree and splicing that with human genes, and deciding, let's experiment with you because we can let you live longer. This gene lives to forever. That's the analogy.
I don't,
Now,
I
no,
don't get
that's
your
the analogy.
I
We're
don't
talking
get your
about
analogy.
transgenetic splicing. They are taking genes from a pesticide and a poison, inserting that into a corn gene to grow this corn that will be its own pesticide all by itself.
It's being
At
done
the same
hundreds
time-
of years ago, Bonnie.
No, Ben, it was not.
Yes.
You're talking about taking species. You could not 100 years ago take a cat and decide, let's use some of that gene into that tomato because I want it to turn a different color or whatever. You do not. We have
Now we have different cats, different colors.
Yeah, exactly.
Different
and
dogs.
Again, those
all
are
came from-
same. Those
Well,
are
I know.
the same organism. You're not talking about transgenic organisms.
We have
a
different-
baby.
We have different
Hold on.
cords.
You and I have a baby. Okay? We've had children. You are Chinese, which is a different genetic makeup than me.
Bonnie,
there is nothing
we are
that
of
was
the
done in
same-
the laboratory.
We're of the same species.
Exactly
Yeah.
my point.
Well, let's talk about Bill. When you say, you're an organic farmer, could you define to us what organic means?
Well, organic, I like to think of it as a holistic way of working with nature and improving, working with ecosystems, using nature's methods to grow our food or grow whatever crops we're growing. I think growing food is critically important. It's going to be where we're going to be very important in the future. People know that, or generally know that organic farmers don't use chemical fertilizers, don't use chemical pesticides, don't use GMOs, don't use antibiotics, but the real thing is about building soil health, encouraging a healthy ecosystem in the soil, a healthy ecosystem in the soil, so that we can build the fertility and build the health of the plants and animals that we're feeding from that land, and then the health of the people.
Well, when I was in grade school, and I came from the Philippines, and of course everybody there does organic for the simple reason nobody can afford to buy fertilizer.
Yeah.
And their problem, of course, is the crop failure after 3 generations of planting the same crop.
Yes.
And that's how I learned about nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and that you have to rotate your crops and so on and so on.
Yes.
Because in that area where it's so dirt poor that you do not have any chemicals to put it back into the soil, you have to be really know how to learn organic planting, if we might
Yes.
call it that way.
And rotation crops
And
and,
rotation.
using, I
And-
grow a lot of beans on my
Right.
farm because they fix nitrogen, and I move them around so that they're available. One of the things we need to do most on this planet is to help those small farmers, provide them with tools that help them to grow better, knowledge and other resources and inputs that help them grow better, and GMOs in general don't do that.
Well, let me tell you what they did
Okay.
when I was growing up. So they take a land, a farm, I mean acres and acres, and plow it, and maybe plant a couple of generation, or maybe even a third generation of corns, or for whatever means it is. And then on the 4th generation, meaning the 4th season,
Yeah.
they know, the farmers will know, that whatever they plant in that same amount of land is not going to yield as much as they used to be in the first time.
Yes.
So what do? They abandon that farm, and they burn that side of the mountain to have to clear another farm.
And that's not a good way to do it.
And that basically becomes how it was done over there. Now, we call it organic farming also, because obviously they were not able to do anything.
But organic farming, I mean, on an organic farm, you couldn't
So-
grow corn in the same field 3 years in a row and maintain your
So
certification.
basically what you're saying, and just for clarification from our audience, that organic is really not just a simple matter of we're not going to use chemicals and we're not going to use insecticides to grow our plants.
Yes, it's about building
It's
soil
about
and
the
ecosystem
entire
health.
art of knowing exactly and scientific way of knowing what that soil is going to yield
Yes.
for your food supply.
Yes.
And it ought to be contamination free, and at the same time you're not destroying the environment doing it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, explain to me about the beans. How do the beans work to,
Oh, the beans host a bacteria on their soil called rhizobia.
green beans? You're talking about green beans?
Well, there are a whole range of crops. Any of the legumes, beans, peas, alfalfa, clover. There's some trees, locust trees will do it. There's some other things that are grown in other parts of the world, Africa. There's some little shrubs, I think, that do it. All plants exude stuff out of their roots, which is very important to the soil health, soil ecosystem. These legumes exude things which attract this rhizobia bacteria, and they let the rhizobia bacteria actually live partly in their roots, and the bacteria are able to convert the nitrogen that's in the air all around us into a form of nitrogen that the plant can take up. And in return, the plant gives the rhizobia carbohydrates that it makes with the help of solar energy.
Nitrogen fertilizer, remember?
Nitrogen
The explosive?
fertilizer.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's an alternative. I mean, conventional farmers use nitrogen that's made out of natural gas, which has some severe issues with climate change.
Right.
And then when you put that nitrogen fertilizer in the soil, especially on thousands of acres of cornfields in the Midwest, you release a lot of nitrous oxides, which are very strong greenhouse gases, worse than the carbon dioxide.
You mean like the cow manure? I thought that was.
No, this is chemical nitrogen. That's made
Really?
of,
Chemical?
Yeah, it's the
Oh, wow.
chemical fertilizer.
Yeah, chemical nitrogen is made out of natural gas. It's the same nitrogen that the rhizobia get out of the air,
Right.
but instead of using the power of plants and organisms, we use the power of chemical factories and natural gas to take that nitrogen out of the air and make it in a thing we can put in a bag and then put on the soil. But then once you put that on the soil, you remember the explosions they had in Oklahoma City, they used fertilizer and fuel oil.
Right, right.
Good soil has organic matter in it. So you put this nitrogen fertilizer into good soil, it burns up the organic matter, which releases carbon dioxide, and also releases those nitrous oxides, which are both greenhouse gases, and destroys much of the life that's in the soil, although it may make the crops grow very fast or very well.
Initially.
But it doesn't initially.
Yeah.
But then also the other problem with the nitrogen is it leaches out. There's that huge dead zone, which I think this year is the size of Connecticut in the Gulf of Mexico south of New Orleans, which is because of all the nitrogen fertilizer running down the Mississippi River and the Missouri River and the Ohio River from those farms.
What do you mean by a dead zone? What is that?
It's
I have
a-
not heard about this.
Okay, a dead zone is an area which has excess nutrients. In salt water, it is excess nitrogen. Nitrogen is a limiting nutrient in salt water. If you add nitrogen to it, more algae will grow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the algae then, as it decomposes, absorbs the nitrogen, so the water doesn't have absorbs the oxygen in the water. So then the organisms, the fish, shrimp, whatever's in the water, can't
live.
breathe anymore, and so that's why it's a dead zone. And it happens in Long Island Sound. It's not dead yet, but much of the problem with Long Island Sound is excess nitrogen. Some of it comes from farms, some of it comes from lawns, some of it comes from sewage treatment plants. But excess nitrogen in salt water is very damaging. Excess phosphorus in fresh water is very damaging the same way. If you see a pond on a farm where the cows have been in there or they've used a lot of manure around it, it'll be very green. And that's from the excess phosphorus, which encourages the growth of algae in that pond.
Oh, my goodness.
So, Bill, there's more to organic farming than actually not using fertilizers
there's a-
and all of this. And my question to you is, this really is a very good concept, basic concept of not just soil management, but environmental management,
Yes.
as well as preventing all the bad things that we have done to the environment. And the reason for I'm saying this is because it used to be that a farmer will just do the land himself, even though he may not be using fertilizers. He may think, well, he's doing something good.
Yeah.
And then it just gave it to the children. The children does exactly the same thing. So going back to what I explained to you in the Philippines, that the farmer, after 2 or 3 generations of the same crop, will just abandon it and burn everything. Basically, it's the same situation here. If we don't teach our young farmers
yes.
on soil conservation and the use of this leach out fertilizers, if they're going to use it,
Yeah.
and so on. So
Yeah, there's a lot of work done. I mean, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which is part of the USDA, the Agriculture Department, is doing. It sort of made a real change in the last few years, and it's really pushing soil health. It's encouraging farmers not to till, because that's one of the ways you can really destroy soil health is with tillage, either a rototiller on a garden or plows on a farm. They're encouraging people with cover crops to keep something growing on the soil all the time, because those plants are always feeding the organisms in the soil. If you don't have plants on the soil, the organisms don't have food and they can't thrive. They can't reproduce. And it's those organisms that are able to extract the nutrients from the soil particles, from any decomposing organic matter there, and make them available to the plants.
Is this what happened in the 1930s when they have a huge dust bowl in?
The Dust Bowl was about plowing the land too much and
Right.
trying to do the kind of agriculture where you bring in, I think at that time they were bringing in Chilean nitrate, which is bat guano or guano from Peru and
Right.
Chile,
Right.
and they were putting on the soil to grow wheat for what they thought was a bull market to ship that wheat all around the world. And what happened is the market collapsed. They had destroyed this land that should never have been plowed because it didn't get much rain, and as long as it's covered with plants, it's not going to move. But you plow it at 2 or 3 years, you add this nitrogen fertilizer, and you've destroyed the structure of the soil. So then the winds come along, and it blows away. Let me tell you about a book that really influenced my thinking back in 1970 or something, called Farmers of 40 Centuries. It's written by I think he was a soil scientist at USDA and also in Wisconsin. And he could see at that time that the agriculture that was happening in this country was not destined for long term. So he went to Asia, he went to China, he went to Japan, he went to Korea, because he knew that there they'd been feeding their population for 4,000 years on a very small land base, and he looked at the methods they used, which are basically the methods that many of the organic farmers, community gardeners, the people who are really creating a new food system in Connecticut and around the world right now are using. Intensive growing of food for people, near the people, recycling most of the resources, recycling all organic matter, and growing a variety of crops.
And
One of the, well, we only have a few minutes.
Yeah.
Let me just, I wanted to say, when you were just talking, you talked about educating young people.
Yes.
You worked really hard at getting a high school in Connecticut that
I did.
actually teaches agriculture.
Yes.
This form of agriculture. It's breaking ground, I understand, in New Haven
It's
now?
called Common Ground.
It's called
Common Ground High School. And it is on a farm in New Haven. Actually, just right now, they're putting up this exciting new building, which is maybe LEED Platinum. It's made out of, the building itself is sort of an educational tool because of the way it's made, the way it's designed. It's all using natural heat and cooling for the building.
Wow.
yeah, when I was growing up, everything that you wrote here is exactly what we were doing, not knowing that we were doing it right.
Yes, right.
A lot of people think that, well, gee, those were primitive times. You have a pig here, and then you have a chicken there, and then you have the garden there.
Yeah.
And basically, yes, you are you're putting back into the soil this compost and everything.
Yes.
And yet, the things that we learn is that, well, this really is hard work.
That
If
is
there
true.
is just a way that we can make life easier for us, that's probably what we would have done. And so there goes the farms and so on and so on. Now you're saying that every family should look at this, your method, and that they should have a small farm in their backyard, and probably may even have a few chickens. and so
There's
on.
a couple ways to get around
And
that.
people are doing that.
They
I
are.
mean, it's
I mean,
amazing.
we are
how many-
actually doing
Yes.
it.
Yeah.
But there's a way you can do it without a lot of the work, and that's by becoming involved with the community share farms,
Yes, CSAs.
the CSAs.
And if you go to the NOFA website, ctnofa.org, you can find a list of those there.
Exactly. And those are wonderful because you will pay for part of the cost of that farm,
Yes?
and then you get a share as all the crops come in. You get organic food. It's the best tasting foods. For those of us that are really concerned about the GMOs, there's a couple of things I want to leave with everyone. As much as our democracy is at stake, as much as our right to know should not be violated, the only thing that the government wants to hear about is actually what are the reports. One of the things I found out was that when they sit down in Washington or in the state of Connecticut, when you're trying to pass these laws, the politicians will sit there with Monsanto on one side and non-GMO on the other. The Monsanto people will come out with the studies that they've presented to the FDA. They're saying this is fact. The side of non-GMO is saying it's our right to know. Well, when you put fact against, well, I want to know, politicians will go with the facts, which is one reason why Monsanto has been winning.
You know, apparently the biotech industry spent $100,000 per yes vote.
For every yes vote.
To get
It's
the
amazing.
$100,000 to get the dark egg.
One of the things that you do have to understand, every mother should understand what she's feeding her children. Jeffrey Smith's book is specific about the research that was done. Almost none of it in the United States, because there has been no third-party independent testing of GMOs done in the United States. Seeds of Deception is a must-read. You can go to both of the major grocery stores in Norwich, both ShopRite and Stop and Shop, are carrying non-GMO products. Insist that you want non-GMO products. Insist that you want milk that is has
RBST free.
RBST free, so that you're not giving your children hormones. This is really important. If we can't get our Congress and Senate to vote, we can vote with our pocketbook. You do not have to buy things that could poison your children. So, Bill, thank you so
You're
much
very welcome.
for
And
joining.
people are voting with their pocketbooks. Organic sales are going up. The sales of non-GMO stuff is going up. I mean, that's part of the citizens taking charge, and we need to do that.
Thank you so much for your organic
Well,
farm.
you're
We
welcome.
didn't get to speak about half of what I wanted to talk with you about today, but I think that if maybe at the end of the season, when you're not farming,
Okay.
and
we
you've
do
gotten your cover,
Yeah.
your ground cover on, we could have you come back and talk a little bit more, just specifically about organic farming and why having smaller local foods, a food supply that's local to us is so important.
70% of the food in the world is grown by small farmers.
Yes. Bill, thank you so
Thank you
much.
very much.
We appreciated you having.
Great to meet
Thank
you.
you.
We
for
appreciate
coming, Bill.
having you here with us. Next week, we're going to be talking again about, we have a lady from the Food and Water Watch, Connecticut Food and Water Watch, and someone from the Sahara Club that will be talking to us about the environment and particularly the natural gas pipeline coming through Connecticut. So we will see you next Wednesday. Thank you for watching.
And thank you.